Welcome back. This is part 2 of my conversation with remarkable fine art photographer Sandy McLea. If you've not yet watched part 1, I would strongly encourage you to do so before continuing. You will find the link below. This conversation builds directly on everything we discussed in the first video. And without that foundation, you'll be joining the story halfway through. For those of you who are up to date, today is exciting. Today we go inside the Idle Quarters collection. The collection that took Sandy McLea from a local conversation to international acclaim. And Sandy has done something today that he very rarely does. He has brought in an Idle Quarters piece completely disassembled, layer by layer, to show you exactly how he builds these extraordinary pieces of work. And trust me, you want to stay for this. So, without any further delay, let's get right into it. I remember you calling me into your studio. I came to have a visit and you said, I want to show you something that I'm busy with. And when you showed me what you were busy with, I realized this is now just the result of so much input and so much experimentation. I mean, the same Sandy McLea who decided he's not going to do fashion and glamour. The same Sandy McLea who started to print out compositions because he didn't want, telegraph poles or pylons in the background. The same Sandy McLea that brought me the little penguins that almost ended our friendship. And this suddenly there was this work, and again, it will be in the video. But I don't think you will ever get an appreciation for what you're looking at unless you see it in reality. But
yes, that is true.
Yeah. The series you called Idle Quarters, and this series, and you can explain just now a little bit about these rooms and the way you built them. But it was this series that took you into a different price bracket. It took you into international. You started to get shows internationally with this, and this whole journey was starting to become such an exciting space. Tell me about how Idle Quarters turned up straight after or in between the Painted Street series.
There's one thing I always like to tell people if I'm trying to teach them something about just creating stuff, and it's taking years of the craziest ideas you have and all the stuff you develop, all the skills you develop. And I think it's like it's a journey that you're on, and you learn so many different things, and in a way there comes a moment where you need to do something and you realize that you've learned all these things, from paper tolling to collaging and decoupaging, hand painting, bending paper, editing, photography, everything. And then there becomes a moment where you see something like, how do I get this message through? And just having a toolbox, a skill set for yourself allows you to do something crazy. And I think that's what's important, is just allowing yourself to be completely open with what you have in your skills, or your disposal in your skills. And when I went to go shoot that, I didn't know how I was going to execute it. I knew the subject matter, and I had a predetermined idea. And one thing you always taught me is, like, when you go somewhere, don't predetermine or preconceive what it's going to be like, because it always lands up different.
Exactly.
You're going to go shoot something, you get there, it changes. Exactly. So I had a rough idea of what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to do a panoramic. And I walked in there.
But hold on, before you walk in there, you headed off to Ghost Town. That's where so you went to southern Namibia.
Kolmanskop.
A little town called Kolmanskop, which was a deserted village
Yeah.
where some of the rooms and that have been left to the elements of the sand and that's where you went for this series. And you can pick it up from there.
Yeah. So I had been there before when I was very young, before I even picked up a camera. And it was a quick visit and it stayed in my mind. And I was like, I need to go back to a place now that I can capture it. So I went there, and when I got there, it was different. And I stood there and I actually didn't know what to do. I was like, I'm going to shoot this. And I'm like, but
it's like stage fright.
Yeah, it's like stage fright, but it's also, there's everything I learned when I speak about the story about something, like there's a story to tell. And I was like, I can't take a picture. I need to tell a story. And the story about that place was, for me, it was the atmosphere.
Right.
You know, you've got this whole history and the dunes coming through into the rooms. You have the slow decay of the paint and the patinas. And what it does is it creates an atmosphere. And I was like, how do I get an atmosphere? How do you capture atmosphere? And I mean, in photography, we tried it the whole time. That's one of the main things.
I mean, those rooms were ghostly silent.
Yes. I mean, you'd go in some parts and you'd actually be nervous. You'd be like, you'd hear something and you'd be like,
So that very same, I'm going to just interrupt you here before you continue, that very same place and some of those very same rooms, which is very popular amongst photographers. That trip I mentioned to you up the west coast into Namibia, we stopped off there. But my approach there was pure photographic, funny enough. I decided not to go down the montage collage route there, but I remember the deafening silence. I just enjoyed you mentioned patinas and textures. That's what I enjoyed about that place. So please pick it up from there.
Yeah, so the one thing is like, I didn't know how to do, I didn't know what I was going to do. So I shot it with multiple images and did a stitch. So traditional single image stitch. And I captured as much atmosphere as I could. So I would almost do a 360 degree on some of them, 180 degrees, 270 degrees. And
that's panoramic
stitching. You're a tripod and you do multiple stitches and that. And I thought that would be a good way to capture everything. And get my composition and get the colors and the light and everything. And then I went back with the idea that I'm going to use some of my skills, but I didn't know what to do. And I started making mock-ups of them.
But using
like small ones.
This was the urban facade.
This is where urban facade comes in. So I'm like, how do I mix urban facade into this? And, you know, I wasn't going to be doing paper tolling because there's nothing really to toll. It's such a huge scene. And part of urban facade was I shifted the buildings.
Okay.
But now I had this strange distortion from doing a panoramic, and I had to find new skills. So I had to develop a few techniques in bending prints.
I remember seeing some of the walls that were
there's physical curvature. So you have this optical curvature from the camera lens, and then you have a physical curvature, and they had to play together. So there was a lot of trial and error in trying to build these, and then also finding a way to interlock them and connect them. So in essence, I was breaking the whole image down into a puzzle, I was photoshopping a 3D puzzle, and then rebuilding it
into a physical room. I mean, those artworks, I mean, what are we talking? Some of them were like almost a meter wide.
Yeah, some were.
And they were deep, but it felt like you were in the room.
Yeah, there was an extra depth to it, because you have the perspective and conjoining lines and the depth of photography visually, and then you have a physical depth, and they kind of added on to each other. So people would always look at the frame and be like, but well, the frame's like this, but the picture's that. How does that work?
Yeah, but you took it even further because you started adding lighting.
Yes.
And I mean, that was, and not, you know, tastefully done, just a light flicker of a light bulb about to end its life in the back room. I mean, you know, and you had the skills to be able to put that together. And I mean, that was, it's just incredible. So, you know, our clients were saying that they could take this, put it up on their wall, and in the evening, because it's, you know, it runs off batteries. I think you had rechargeable batteries, so you didn't have cables.
Yeah, they went through a few iterations, but yeah.
Yeah, and there, you know, you felt this was a living artwork, a living room. I mean, that really, as I say, this series took you to just another space. And you did a lot of embellishing.
Yeah.
Because I remember where the paper was joining, and you actually painted in certain areas. And how long does it, or how long did it take you to make one of those?
I think the long ones take 100 hours.
Okay.
So, and the smaller ones, you know, half the time. So,
Yeah.
but 100 hours.
Okay, well,
worked it out, which is which is long for a photograph.
Yeah.
But the main thing, though, I just want to like say is that the idea really was capturing atmosphere.
Yes.
And story.
Yeah.
So capturing atmosphere, the best way to do it for me was simply creating an atmosphere and building an atmosphere. And that's where the three-dimensional thing comes in.
Completely.
So if you build an atmosphere, you capture atmosphere.
Yes.
And still today, I mean, I don't like to float my own boat, but you know, I really enjoy finishing it, putting it in a frame, and I look at these pieces and I understand why I do them. And they just have that, presence, you know, that they portray a presence and a story and a feeling. And you know, when we take a photograph and we show someone a photograph, it's almost like I wish you were here moment.
Yes.
And so for me, these are my best pieces where they show best of you are here.
Yes. You're with me.
You're with me. This is what I felt. And the feeling of this eerie room and the space of this room, I want you to feel it as well.
It comes back to what Freeman said as well in the discussion. You'll see it. It's in the lineup to come out on the studio progression of our interviews, where he's also saying it's all about what you want to say. Why are you creating the art? What is the reason? What is that underlying reason? Why? Not how, but why. I mean, you tackled both, but at least you knew what you wanted to get. And I think, again, just being able to work together over this long period of time, it's so good to look back on this journey. I mean, you know, just coming back to the workshop that you gave, that we all get influenced by one another. We do. And I decided I was going to try. You remember?
I mean, yeah, because you know, like I was getting hands-on, and you were also at the same time exploring and getting hands-on and experimenting, and you'd show me your things. And I remember walking into your photographic studio, and every year it looked more like an art studio. It's like paint and glues on the wall and so on. And I remember you also mentioned to me that you had come up with something, and you were excited to show me, and you were like, I'm not going to tell you everything. And then, I think it was called Kings and Queens.
Yes, it's a series of fallen, iconic music heroes who were no longer with us, which needed to be embellished and brought back to life. Do you remember, I think the very first one I showed you was my impression of Elvis. I didn't like it at all, so I went and redid it. But it was a combination of the paint you used in your collaging process that you came up with that workshop. And then I decided to take the fact that you layering one on top of the other, I decided to lift, even if it's just one or two elements, and then to use photographic lighting to bring it to life.
You had an interesting process, very interesting, where you would re-photograph art.
Yes.
You would make an artwork, re-photograph it, and that photograph would become another artwork. So you had this amazing
Step by
step, and when you looked at it, you were like, you almost want to touch it to see like, what's paint here? And it's because you got paint and a photograph of paint.
Yeah, exactly right. And then the lighting brought the shadows to it, and suddenly without the shadows it didn't really work, but with the shadows the texture started to
But
work.
you felt like the amount of freedom you get is amazing to just like build up and take an image to this new expression that you want to have.
And I think, as we walked along road together, the difficulty that I found was wanting to express, having every intention to take it into a different space, but then having that commercial thing saying, will it work in the gallery? Will people connect with it? And I almost wish I could start this career again and say, I don't actually care what people think.
Yeah.
I'd love to be in that space where you can say, well, no, I'm going to explore the boundaries as far as I can. Yeah. And that's what happened in Idle Quarters for you, is that you took it to a space that you had reached the point where it was, those works you can see you created for yourself. And I congratulate you for that.
Thank you.
And I congratulate you for that. I would like to, if you've got some time, just go through and have a look at some of your work, just so that we can just see, because again, on what we've shown now, people don't get the idea, but maybe we can just get some idea of what you've actually done, and then we can close the conversation. So Sandy, this is an example of your first body of work.
Yeah.
So here you've photographed in sections, and I wanted to talk about that in a moment, and then you've put it together with very specific alignment. By the way, I see this is one of your printer's proofs right in the beginning. I see that it's taken a bashing.
It's been some marks. It has been manhandled, yes.
Okay, so this has been around a while, but before we even started on how you did it, this is one of your favorites out of about 20 odd different pieces.
Yeah, this is my favorite. This is the one I fell in love with, and keep an edition for myself.
And also, what's interesting is I know you've we will show it to the viewers, but you've done some color as well. But you've done mostly desaturated color.
Yeah, the majority of the series, is very desaturated. Okay. And I wanted to keep the narration of the story more focused than having lots of colors.
Yeah. So if you could just take us through your approach, so how you would actually photograph it, and then maybe talk a little bit about the alignment of, especially the horizontal lines.
Yes. So I'd find these scenes and I'd fall in love with them. I'd walk down this, what's it called again? A jetty or a water break. And again, I always try to create a story. So within the scene, I would photograph up to 50 images, and then I would capture so many different parts of it, and I'd go home and I'd have this array of different images, and I'd be playing with it, each one individually, and it would almost grow on the screen, and I'd come back and visit it even a week later. But the key element for me was to keep a visual point consistent.
Yeah.
And even though I was able to mess around and let the eye fill in the rest of the parts, I would let it find itself, and it would create its own balance. But I would keep a horizontal line, and then I would connect critical points in each photograph, but I would never let it be perfect, because I wanted to have each one separate, and that would be like having steps and walking past a scene and telling a story.
I remember you telling me once, and forgive me if I'm wrong, but you said that you would print out little postcards, let them lay there, reassemble them, keep reassembling them until you lived with it for a while before you started to put your final assembly together.
Yeah, each one could take weeks. And sometimes I was just never happy and I'll put it aside in the drawer, come back later, and then it would be replacing one of these and then it would work. And then I'd be happy.
Well, beautiful. Let's take you to the second piece. I'm going to go get it quickly. I see we're for a treat today because you brought us what many people probably would have never seen, and this includes your collectors, and that's a disassembled piece of idol quarters.
Yes.
Have I got it the right way around?
Yeah, you do.
Okay.
So yeah, this one gives away the odd secret of how I put it together.
Okay. There we go.
And, you know, so what happens, it starts from one image, and then in Photoshop, I break it up into a puzzle. So, and, you know, we could have between 50 to 100 different pieces.
Okay.
Depending on the work.
All right.
And then...
Well, let's go right to the background then.
Yeah.
I want to start by showing our viewers the curvature of the paper, especially with the foreground. I was going to say most people don't even, you know, they appreciate the art, but they don't know how you get there. So just have a look here. I just want to talk about the bending. So I don't know, Sam, can you see that?
Yeah, and the depth. Yeah. So that would be the maximum depth of the image.
Yes. So that will give you the rolling feel of the dunes and the sand in the foreground. And then if we take it, let's stand it up a little like that. And maybe you can take us through some of the assembly.
Yeah, so what I do is I always start, or most of the pieces I start with the sand and create that as a foundation and then work from there. And I start from the back to the front. And in the back section, what I do is I actually photograph separate images when I'm there on the
location. In other words, you go into the other room.
I would walk in the doorway and shoot that room.
So you've got the room to build on.
So I've got all the information there, and then close it up. So when you view this work, you can actually see down inside or down a passage or in a room.
And I mean, later you started to light those rooms because you wanted the background to be a little bit lighter. So you started to put lights inside the room.
Or keep it really realistic and control and correct the contrast, because you would lose it from the shadows of the panels. So the lights went in and captured that atmosphere. And then what I do is I have this curvature to them, because we have the converging lines from photography, and then we added the actual bending of the paper. Okay, so that would curve.
Giving away a lot of your secrets here, but have a look at the intricacy of the joining. So this guy has got the patience of a saint. He cuts out every single one of the little flanges, and then he cuts out then the corresponding spaces where they must go in. So let's put this in, hook it in as if it's where you want it.
I'm doing this with one hand.
No problem. And then if you look at, if you bring that up and bend it like and
then it gets
now you start to get that idea. You can already see how it starts to weave its way into a 3D impression. And then I remember this join was never perfect for you, so you used to paint that back in.
Yes. Yeah, because when you cut paper, there's always a bit of white.
Yes.
So then I color match that with watercolors, and I color match every single side of the paper
before they get put together and afterwards.
And afterwards.
Yeah, unbelievable. So, something that I don't think many of your collectors have seen. I don't think many of your followers have seen. And I think it's one thing talking about it in an interview space. It's another thing seeing it as a photograph. But it's another thing seeing it in person. And I can promise you, when these are assembled and they're in this beautiful frame box and they're on the wall and there's little lightings going on, they are just a joy to behold. Congratulations,
Thank you very much, Martin.
Yeah, this is really special, and I can't wait to see some of the new pieces you're going to be finishing. So I congratulate you for that, Sandy. Well done. And
thank you, Martin.
And I think, as I said right in the beginning, this discussion was way overdue. I I know my students love montaging and collaging, and a lot has been influenced by our journey. So they would enjoy watching this video and meeting you now, in person. And I have to ask the question, where to from here? Are you still sticking with idle quarters to finish that off before you go anywhere else, or have you got something new?
Yes, I'm still sticking to idle quarters. I think with the subject matter, it stays with Kolmanskop and maybe a few special places, and then find another special place overseas or something, and try get some international subject matter maybe as well. But as it comes to a technique, idle quarters is pretty much my trademark and it's who I am.
Well, good.
So I'll be staying with that.
Good, and I'm so pleased to be speaking to an artist who uses the camera as part of a process, as opposed to sitting here talking to you about your fashion and glamour photography. So yes. Congratulations.
Me too. Thanks very much, Martin. And also thank you for being there in all the steps that I have taken.
Absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here for both parts of this discussion. If you enjoyed this video and like to stay connected, please sign up for the Osner Studio Atelier. You'll receive early notice on upcoming discussions and conversations just like this. Stories behind celebrated artworks and discussions on the techniques that make certain work truly extraordinary. You'll find the link below. And if you enjoyed photo collage and photo montage and would like to learn more, remember I teach fine art photography at the Art Photography Academy, and I'd love to see you there. I'll also put the links below. And very important, coming up next week, I'll be speaking to an internationally acclaimed photographic artist, creative thinker, and author, Freeman Patterson. You really don't want to miss this one. So, as always, stay creative. Why? Because it's just good for you. Until next week, cheers everyone.